What's going on, everyone? So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the new trailer that was just released called Jesus Revolution. And we're going to be talking about what it's about, who's in it, some key things. We're also going to be talking about the dark, sinister side of this whole thing, as well as ending with a Bible verse, some verses that can really lead you in the way to make clarity of why this all happened. So guys, we're talking about Jesus Revolution. Jesus Revolution happened, and it's based on a true story, and it was based in the 70s when this hippie movement was going around and free love. And so these hippies were just kind of running rampant in the sense of having sex with as many people as they wanted, who didn't matter, doing drugs, psychedelics, all of these things were going on, this sinister living. And then all of a sudden, these hippies become born again believers, and they encounter Christ and they start living for him, and it kind of changes everything because church at that time was very I guess proper, but it's horrible use of words. If you go to a charismatic church now, it's really because of this movement, in the sense of those non-charismatic churches were really how it was. And then all of a sudden, this movement comes around. And guys, there is a specific hippie preacher, as they call him, named Lonnie Frisbee. And Lonnie Frisbee is the one who really kind of sparked this entire movement. He was introduced to Chuck Smith. Now, Chuck Smith was the pastor of Calvary Chapel, and there are Calvary Chapel everywhere. I mean, organizations all over the world. So there's Germany, US, all over the world. So he meets Chuck Smith. And at this time, Chuck Smith, his church is low attendance. There's not really much happening. He's kind of all out of hope. And all of a sudden, he's also kind of frustrated with this hippie movement that's going on. And all of a sudden, seems to be his daughter introduces him to Lonnie Frisbee, and Lonnie Frisbee kind of changes the whole scope of things with Chuck Smith and his church. And from there's also a character in this movie, and his name is Greg Laurie. Now, Greg Laurie is a world-renowned pastor, author, all of those things. And this is also about Greg Laurie being introduced to Lonnie Frisbee, and this is about Greg Laurie being born again. Because before Greg Laurie was even a part of all this, he was lost and living for this world. Well, then all of a sudden he meets Lonnie Frisbee. Lonnie Frisbee baptizes Greg Laurie. It's through Lonnie Frisbee, God using Lonnie Frisbee, that Greg Laurie hears the gospel and is then born again and saved. So there's a whole lot of things going on here. And I want to see the movie. I can only imagine the same people who made that movie have created this movie. But guys, there's also a dark, sinister side to this whole story. And that's what I obviously don't think the movie's going to talk about, although I think it definitely should. But Lonnie and Chuck ended up having a falling out. But Lonnie did get married at one point, briefly, and ended up getting divorced in his life. And as he was doing this whole Jesus Revolution, preaching and all those things, there was a side of him that really contradicted a lot of things, because he was on Sundays preaching about Jesus. People were getting healed. People were getting set free. All of these things were happening. But on Saturday, he was partying, he was doing drugs, he was practicing in homosexual relations. And what also ended up happening to Lonnie Frisbee was how he died. See, Lonnie would be, I think he'd be about like 70, 73 if he was still alive today. But he ended up passing away because of AIDS and HIV. And so Lonnie Frisbee dies of AIDS. Lonnie Frisbee lived this seemingly second life. He was preaching and teaching on Sundays, and then before that, he was just kind of living of the world, which really kind of confuses people. It can confuse the Christian community, and non-Christians love to use Lonnie Frisbee as an example of like some gay, guy, hippie preacher, sparked the Jesus Revolution movement. What do you say to that? So what we can say to that, guys, is simply just seeing what the Word has to say about it. See, it doesn't make sense to us when we think he's preaching, people are being saved, people are getting baptized, people are getting physically healed from ailments, blindness, sickness, whatever it is. This whole thing is happening. Greg Laurie is who he is now because he met Lonnie Frisbee and Chuck Smith and his Calvary Chapel. They're all over the world now, but that all kind of started because of Lonnie Frisbee. And so you can really wrestle with that, and you can go into a place that you shouldn't go. And the place that we shouldn't go is just writing this whole movement off completely because of Lonnie Frisbee, because there are people who are in this movement, who are involved in this movement, who we see the fruit and we see how much Christ impacted their own life. And just because one guy that we, see and we read about ended up living two separate lives, doesn't mean we can write it all out. So I always want to turn to the scriptures to help us get clarity. And so what do we do with news like that? What do we do with information like that? Well, we see what the Lord has to say. And what he says in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23 is this: "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, 'Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.'" So I don't know Lonnie Frisbee's heart at the end of his life or anything like that, but obviously a man who is living two lives, a person who's living two lives, preaching and teaching on Sunday, but then living sinisterly on Saturday and whatnot, that's not evidence of a born-again believer. But at the end of Lonnie's life, who knows? He could have had true repentance in his thing. That's not for us to dwell on and sit on. But for those who need clarity on characters like Lonnie Frisbee, what the possible outcome is what we read in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. And so the Lord could have easily said, "You've done all these things in my name, and you sparked this movement and this revolution, and people have come to Christ from your preaching. People have been set free. People have been healed because of you touching them, laying hands on them. But I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. Depart from me." So that could easily have been the response that Lonnie Frisbee got from the Lord when Lonnie passed away from AIDS. But I hope that you would go check this movie out. Watch it for yourself. After I watch the movie, I may do another video about this. But this is just kind of my breakdown. This is me just kind of saying, hey, this is our approach to this movie, this story, this based on a true story, these characters, Chuck, Greg, Lonnie, all of that. This should be our response biblically and help give us clarity on understanding tricky situations like this. So I hope this helps, and God bless.